down to your socks.
Look for new Tide, the toughest Tide, for a clean that'll knock your socks off.
Shh. Some thief you are. Don't look what you've done. What I've done. We've got to clean up.
No, that stuff won't get it really clean. Now, where is it? Ooh, spick and span.
More evidence to clean up. Yeah. Yeah. Would you cut that out?
Yeah, but some people still aren't using spick and span in the bathroom.
And not as clean as it will be soon.
What are you doing?
The house looks wonderful. What'd you do?
Spick and Span all-purpose liquid. It's just not clean until it's Spick and Span.
Granola has taken the plunge. Granola dips from Quaker. The wholesome goodness of chewy granola dipped in real milk chocolate. And Quaker's discovered the greatest granola taste you'll ever dip into. Granola's taken the big dip. Delicious Quaker granola dips. Dip into them.
If you want to know what office towers go for these days, there is a buyer offering full price for the 19-story Dayon Tower on West Hastings in Vancouver. It won't be final for another month, but BC Development Corporation has been offered $53.5 million for the flashy tower in West Hastings with its 24-carat gold-plated windows. The buyer hasn't been named and no reason is given for the sale except that the time and the price were right. Finally, our weather forecast, and it calls for sunny and clear skies in most regions of the province for tomorrow. The satellite photo showing a ridge of high pressure building in the interior that will bring clear skies tomorrow. On the south coast, a frontal system has moved inland and is slowing down and now should weaken overnight. That will bring sunny skies tomorrow in this area. The forecast for the far north, mixture of sun and clouds, lows of -2 and highs of 1. For the interior, mainly sunny, lows of -6, highs of 4. And for the south coast, sunny, lows of 0 and highs of 8 degrees. Jack Webster is next.
Good evening. Still absolutely no sign of any settlement, legislated or otherwise, in the massive forest industry dispute in British Columbia. Absolutely no sign of any settlement in the tense countervailing proceedings which can impose a tariff on the exports of our lumber. Tonight we're going to tackle one of the men in the eye of these storms. First, here's Steve with the rundown.
The moguls on the top floor of the Hong Kong Bank Tower have picked a financial plum on the edge of the rainforest. The Bank of BC is now part of a larger empire. But is it a good deal for Western Canada? Tonight, President of the Hong Kong Bank of Canada, Gene Nesmith. But first, will our lumber exports continue to feed the American market, or will protectionism south of the border cut our competitive edge? Has the provincial government fumbled negotiations with the United States? In the studio with Webster, Jack Kempf, the Minister of Lands and Forests.
Children are being brought up in British Columbia today in the most complicated current events. Now, you saw the coverage we gave from the BC Federation of Labour today. Have you anything to add or to offer to the possibility of ending this incredible dispute in our key industry, Mr. Kempf?
I guess, if anything, Jack, what I'd like to do tonight is appeal to those I.W.A. members voting right at this time to end that dispute, to do so. Certainly, even if they have a problem with the Hodgson report, I think it's better to allow their people to go back to work, the indirect people that are out of work because of the strike to go back to work and resolve this at the bargaining table.
Well, you've done everything in the woods yourself, from chokeman to green chain to whatnot.
Yes, I have.
Surely you must have some considerable sympathy for men who spend a lifetime in the industry, see their jobs disappearing, and feel that because of the intense competition and the technological changes, that there is no such thing as job security again, and that the employers are massing an attack, not merely in the lumber industry, but everywhere else, to contract out, to cut down the power and influence of unions?
Well, Jack, that's really what we're talking about, I guess, is job security. But the question is, does anyone have job security today? Do you have job security? Do I have job security? You know, a lot of technological change is going on out there. A lot of automation is coming into play. And I think people in the I.W.A., as people in any other union, are going to have to understand that. Understand the fact that there is that possibility for change, and change must come about if we are to stay in a competitive position in world markets today.
But the change seems to hit the guy who is lowest on the totem pole. Everybody thought that in a bargaining unit, your positions were safe in the bargaining unit except for technological change, etc., etc. Now it seems the employers want a free hand to, quote, destroy the unions.
Well, I don't think that's the intent at all,
But
Jack,
is that not the effect of it?
I don't think they're asking for a free hand to do that at all. I think they're asking for a free hand to run their business as is absolutely necessary in today's competitive world. And certainly that may mean, in some instances, a reduction in the numbers working. However, again I say, that is absolutely necessary for us to stay competitive in this world around us in this day and age.
It's a tough decision, though, isn't it?
Certainly it's a tough decision.
Especially tough for guys thrown on the scrap heap after 40, 30 years in the industry with not a smidgen of a pension until, at the moment, they reach the age of 65.
Yes, well, they've compromised in the Hodgson report and cut that in half and come down to 60 years of age. And maybe in the future there's a possibility for an improvement over that.
Should be. However,
again, I say I think they should be working while trying to resolve these things at the bargaining table. Understand, Jack, if those people live to be 150 years old, they're not going to gain what they've lost in wages, etc., in the last 3.5 months.
well, apart from
what
the
do they
idea,
get?
your Premier himself is kind of not sitting on the fence, doesn't quite know what to do about legislating them back to work. Would you be in favor of legislating the union back to work on the terms of the Hodgson report?
Well, certainly that's a decision that the government is going to have to make. I would rather not. I think the collective bargaining system is a good system, and it has to resolve this dispute. You know, government doesn't want to be the meat in the sandwich, and certainly we can very easily get ourselves in that position by forcing some kind of agreement. And that's what we'd have to do on these people.
Then we come to the countervail. And skipping, there is no decision yet. When will the next finite event be on the countervail?
Well, hopefully later this week when the U.S. coalition will make a decision as to whether they feel the 15% figure is equitable or not.
And if they say yes, which was the hope of everybody involved, I suppose, does that mean that the countervail petition would be lifted altogether?
Yes, there would be termination. And
but you would have to increase stumpage and other charges by 15%.
well, what would happen immediately, Jack, is that the federal government would impose an export tax on lumber going into the United States from Canada. Then it would be up to the individual provinces to find means by which to resolve that 15% issue. In other words, find ways at home to bring the revenue from the industry to that 15% figure.
Roughly speaking, you'd have to impose taxes equaling about $350 or $450 million.
That is correct.
In BC, to keep that money in BC instead of going across the border.
That is correct, and that's been our intent all the time, and that's really why we wanted to go the suspension agreement route, to ensure the people of British Columbia that if that kind of tariff were imposed or a figure comparable to a 15% tariff were required by the United States, that money stayed in British Columbia for the good of British Columbians, and primarily, in my mind, to be spent on reforestation and silviculture, and in that way creating more jobs for British Columbians.
2 points in that which I must go through with you. One, you and your Premier were accused of pleading guilty in advance by blowing the lid on your desirability of increasing stumpage, thereby making us plead guilty to subsidy.
No, I don't think that's true, Jack. We were given very, very good advice that the Americans would not accept anything less than the 15%. So on that basis, it was up to us to try and find some middle ground. In fact, I do believe, had we have gone the suspension agreement route, and we're not able to do that because we've passed the point of no return, that it may have had a positive effect on the decision to be made by the coalition in the United States. It possibly could have been less than 15%.
People like Zimmerman are wrong there, therefore, are they
I
not?
believe they are.
Zimmerman says, offer them nothing. We can win it on the actual legal rights involved in the fight.
Well, we're doing that as well, and we're double tracking. At least we were double tracking until the 28th of November. We were fighting vehemently the preliminary determination at the same time as having ready and would have made an application for a suspension agreement. We were double tracking it.
Next question. How big a mess did you find in your department when you went in as Minister of Forests? How big a mess?
Well, that's an unfair question, Jack. Certainly
But
changes have to be made.
There was a mess.
Well, I wouldn't use that strong a word. Changes must be made, and that's the reason that I called for a review, a management review of the forest industry in British Columbia. And really, it would not be right for me to comment on what that review is going to show until such time as it's in, hopefully in early February.
Well, many of us have often had the feeling that we, the people, the taxpayers of BC, have been ripped off by not getting our proper return on stumpage and other royalties.
Well, some have said that.
Do you believe that?
And possibly they're right. But again,
You
Jack,
must believe they're right,
if I
because-
made any comment on that at this time, of course, I would be preconceiving what the review is going to tell me, and that wouldn't be fair.
No, I understand that as a minister of the crown involved, you can't knock the hell out of the forest industry, but I've heard you do it in the past.
Is that right?
Yes.
No, I haven't changed. I'm not less a maverick today than I ever was.
How bad has the record of all governments been in reforestation? Could we do, as some people suggest, really recreate our forests and give hundreds, scores of thousands of jobs if we reforested properly?
Yes, I believe that to be true. And Jack, you know, hindsight is 20/20, and I don't like to dwell in the past. I'm just looking to what can be done in the future. And I perceive British Columbia getting into a 100% reforestation program in British Columbia. That would produce jobs in two ways. One, it would produce jobs in the actual reforestation and silviculture work necessary, thousands of jobs. As well, it would help to raise the annual allowable cut, therefore creating more jobs directly in the industry.
More questions of mine to the Minister of Forests and Lands. It's not lands and forests.
No, it's forests and lands.
And your calls too after the break. Let's get back to Mr. Zimmerman of Noranda, who attacks both you and the federal government for wheeling and dealing on a countervail.
Well, I think Mr. Zimmerman is marching to a different drummer, Jack. He represents other interests in the East, particularly Ontario. And maybe the forest industry in British Columbia isn't the largest thing on his agenda.
Well, Noranda controls Mac and Blow.
Yes, but they also are in many other industries in the province of Ontario. And understand, you know, as far as the forest industry is concerned in other provinces, we in British Columbia represent nearly 70% of the forest industry across Canada. It's our primary industry. It's the industry that the Premier and the government of the province of British Columbia have to be very, very careful and very concerned for.
The other point is, though, by increasing the stumpage and the charges to the TFL holders, etc., to meet the US requirements,
yes,
you're also increasing the price of our products on every other world market. Is that not a dangerous thing to do?
No, I don't think so. I think
I'm right, though, am I
I
not?
think our probably so, Jack, but I think our very high quality lumber, which is looked for on world markets, it's a very high quality dimension lumber, will always have a place, and should possibly be getting more in the way of returns from the world market.
Is it correct that there is an unfair allocation of stumpage and that the northern interior and the southern interior get their raw materials much cheaper than the people who have to log on the side hills on the coast.
I believe there are some inequities. We have a very diverse province, and certainly that, again, is what the review is going to tell me. And maybe we'll have to make some changes.
Could you do
along
that
those
review
lines.
in 3 months, or is it going to be 5 years?
Oh, no, I think we can do that very nicely in 3 months. There are other things that have to be done, but understand, as well as asking for more, I feel that there must be more revenue to the province of British Columbia from that resource. But at the same time, Jack, I am quite willing to look at a lot of the things that we do as government and as a BC Forest Service that can assist the industry. You know, decision making for one thing, red tape, hurdles in the way of industry of doing their job properly.
Section 88.
Section 88, we're looking at that as well.
This is the wonderful one where you can deduct all of your costs from Section 88 so that the government gets less and less revenue.
We're going to
Isn't that
closely scrutinize everything that is done in the forest industry in that management review. And Section 88 will certainly be one of the areas.
Reforestation is largely in the hands of the TFL holders at the moment, is it not?
Well, it's done by TFL holders and the provincial
And
government.
you haven't been able to supply sufficient seedlings for them to carry out the replanting.
Well, I just announced an $8.4 million, an additional $8.4 million for nursery construction starting this next spring. So we're looking at that.
How many jobs, and who's going to do the reforestation jobs? Will these be union jobs in the I.W.A, or will they be unskilled, other student jobs?
Well, some will be union jobs, some probably won't.
How many people could be employed at reforestation?
Oh, I believe that we're probably talking in excess of 10,000 additional jobs.
Are we now talking too about cutting down on our massive raw log exports?
No, we have a very good export policy, Jack, that's working very well, and it really allows export that is in excess of our needs in British Columbia, and also enables areas of the province that have very low-grade and decadent stands and some tough to get at to export that wood because it's worth more on the market, and it's very costly to transport to where it can be manufactured. So, you know, I think we have a very good export policy. It's one that's that certainly needs from time to time some fine-tuning, and we're willing to look at that. At the present time, it's doing a very good job. It's creating a number of jobs that wouldn't necessarily be without it in the province of British Columbia.
We won't discuss Indian land claims, but let's talk about Louisiana Pacific's wafer board plant.
Yes?
We, the people, have loaned them at cheap rates $25 million cash, right?
Yes.
Is that plant going to be any good? Wafer board? Is wafer board the thing of the future? And is it not going to close down a pulp mill up north?
No, it has
a plywood mill.
No, it has nothing to do with that. Wafer board in the market is on the rise, Jack. And you've got to realize that Louisiana Pacific plant, and it could have been someone else besides Louisiana Pacific. It was offered to others. Louisiana Pacific were the only ones that took the bait to build that plant and utilize what has been a waste. In fact, I would suggest that we're going to see more such plants built around the province of British Columbia, a product that hasn't been used in the past.
That will certainly be a good, cheap, non-union plant with non-union wages.
Well, I don't know if I need to comment on that particular comment of yours,
That's
Jack.
my comment. Go ahead to Mr. Kempf, Minister of Forests and Lands.
Yeah, Mr. Kempf and Jack, I've been watching this situation on your show for over a week now, and I know it's been going on for months, but we've had all the top people in the lumber business on your show recently, including Jack Monroe and Mike Apsey and
What's your point?
Keith Bennett, and they've all got one thing in common. They all admit to the fact that our lumber business is one of the highest efficient businesses in the world and the highest productivity, so high that the U.S. government has to put a 15% tax on it to protect their business, their lumber business. So why is the industry so adamant in becoming more competitive at the expense of people's basic job securities?
Good question.
Well, you know, automation is natural, Jack, and with new technologies, of course, come those kinds of situations, but you can't take a back seat. You know, we're not the only ones in the world that grow trees. We're not the only ones that can sell lumber to the world market in British Columbia. So we have to keep up with technology, or we're going to fall by the wayside, and we're not going to have the great export of lumber that we now have.
Yeah, the job security is a tough one, I will concede. Although, I mean, I can see how it sticks in their craws. The unions have been fought and won the 5-day, 8-hour day week.
But Jack, we must stay competitive in world markets. And when you realize that even given with the differential in the American dollar, that the cost, the hourly cost to industry in British Columbia for a forest worker is between 40 and 50% higher than it is in the United States.
But,
you know, this is gets to be a very serious situation.
We've increased our take in the American market from 19% up to 33%.
Sure.
Regardless of our increased costs.
Sure.
In fact, that's where we're too greedy. If we'd held back a little bit after the first countervail, we might not have been in this mess.
Well, the Americans like our lumber and they want to buy it, and you know, that's why we need free trade.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have two questions. One's a particular question. I was just wondering if what kind of interaction our government has with the government or agencies in New Zealand that are involved with civil culture and reforestation, because I believe they're one of the most advanced in the world. And I was just wondering if we do have any technology, trade, that kind of thing with them.
Well, I don't know of any direct involvement with them, but certainly our people in the BC Forest Service monitor what is happening in other jurisdictions.
Do you have a better question than that?
Yeah, well, not really a question, but just a point. I just wonder whether forestry should be such an important part of our economy.
Yes, of course it should. I'll be back after the break with more questions. Jack Kempf, of course, is one of the new boys. Oh, you were minister of something else in the Bennett
Lands, Parks and Housing.
Lands, Parks and Housing.
From the 11th of February on this year.
This year. Okay. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to clear up some misinformation that seems to be coming out over this job security clause.
Right.
It is we're not up against we're not against modernization or technological changes.
Right.
What we're fighting for is that the companies want to bring guys in off the streets and take away the jobs that the guys are doing now. They're not eliminating the jobs. They're just replacing them with somebody that is willing to do the job for cheaper.
That's
so
well
put.
It
is not the if we didn't modernize, obviously we wouldn't be in this business. We'd be dead.
They're afraid of a free hand of contracting out, for instance, for repairs of machinery, for welding.
Well, it's not just that, Jack. I mean, it's going to start out. With the mill I work in, they've already cut the millwright workers right back, and they bring in people, and these people are working 5 days a week, steady.
You're talking about overload contractors at the weekend?
That's right. But they laid off 30 some odd millwrights, and now they're bringing in these overload guys, as they call them, and they are working 5 days a week. So they're not picking up 1 or 2 days slack. They are picking up a full week.
You want to tell me which plant?
Yeah, Crown Forest, Fraser Mills.
Yeah.
This is the whole history of Fletcher Challenge, who owns Crown Forest now.
They're the New Zealanders. Hold on, what do you say?
Well, Jack, I find that very difficult to understand. Maybe certainly a very small segment of the industry may have that happening in some areas. But having been on both sides of the fence, I can tell you, as having been on the employer's side, you look very heavily to the people that you work with during the week if you've got a job to do on the weekend or vice versa. I find it very difficult to believe that people would just nonchalantly go out and hire people off the street to do a weekend job, because they wouldn't get it done properly if they did.
Hey, you should hear some of the horror stories that do come on over this, where they've sent people down with carpenter's tools to do the job from these contractors.
Well, maybe that's true, sir, and I'm not saying it isn't, but certainly I still believe that you should go back to work, You should go back to the bargaining table, and let's put some grub on the table of those loggers out there and the mill workers while this dispute is being attempted to be ironed out at the bargaining table.
Thanks for your call. Go ahead from Langley.
Oh, at last. There's my dinner is sitting on the table going absolutely cold, and I was determined that I was going to say this, whether it's worth anything or not. I'm 65, and I'm still working, and I don't have any job security. I just go out there and do the best damn job I can. But look at this. Here are all these people. A lot of them will lose their homes. A lot of marriages are going to break up over this stress. The whole thing is nothing but a blasted mess. How intelligent are these people that are bargaining on either side? And let's look. Are the Japanese smarter than we are? They pull a strike, but they keep on negotiating and they keep on working.
Precisely, ma'am. And
listen, they're going to let our province go right down the chute if they continue doing this stupid thing.
Ma'am, we're losing $20 million for every day this dispute goes on to the economy of the province of British Columbia. That's hurting everyone, Jack. Everyone, every taxpayer, every storekeeper, every I.W.A. member. It's hurting us dearly, and it's something that that's going to be on our backs for a long, long time. Just think of what it does to the provincial treasury. It's horrendous.
There's more to it, however, than the lady says, Mr. Kempf. There really is. When Hutchin came out in his preliminary report and said it appeared to him that the I.W.A. had contracting out protection within the bargaining unit. What's that effect? That's what gave the I.W.A. the impetus to go for it. As it happened, that wasn't brought into effect. But I can well understand how they want to protect their hard-won bargaining unit jobs.
It's a very, very complex issue, Jack, no doubt about it. But I'm still saying it could go on for months and months.
Isn't that ridiculous?
And really, I don't think that the I.W.A. people out there want the government to put them back to work, because as I said before, we're going to have to, in that case, impose a contract on them. I think it would be
we're all taxpayers, and in the end, we're paying for this thing.
Okay, love, go eat your dinner before it gets solid frozen.
I'm going to, and thank you for listening.
What are you having? Oh, I was going to go round for the meal and what gonna... Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to compliment Jack Kempf on his stance concerning the I.W.A. strike. In my estimation, and I'm a free enterpriser, I have to be competitive in the marketplace. If I'm not, I can't put food on the table. Concerning job security, it's fine. It's short-sighted. It's a candle that burns bright but doesn't last very long. And if the unions feel that they want job security, then they may be able to attain it. But I don't feel that it's going to serve the public nor themselves in the long run.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Button. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I'm maybe raising the dear old Canadian flag a lot.
Carry on.
So, and waving it around a little, but I'm really...
I think you've got a party line, haven't you? Have you got a party line? Or is it me? Hold on.
Yeah.
Oh. Try it now.
All right, then. Basically, I've had a hard time understanding what the countervailing duties that were going on around the province, or pardon me, in the United States against British Columbia's softwood products. The only thing I can see in plain and simple terms is that we're selling a product cheaper than they can make it for. What happens when they make toys in Hong Kong and ship them into this country? Are we not putting Canadian or American toy makers out of business? When will this ever stop? I know it sounds stupid, but Mr. Kempf is doing right by putting a duty on, or the stumpage rate here, so we can keep some of the money in this country rather going into the American coffers.
Yes, well, certainly that's been our intent all along, to do whatever was necessary to keep the money in British Columbia for the good of British Columbians.
Well, I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Kempf. You certainly appear to be taking management side in this dispute. I'd like to suggest that if you want to send the workers back, seeing as how both parties were dissatisfied with their previous contract, I would send them back for a 2-year period under their previous contract unless they come to some mutual agreement prior to that 2-year period.
Yes, well, that's a very good recommendation, sir. And to clarify, I'm not taking management side of it at all. You may or may not know that I was, for a long period of time, an I.W.A. member in the province of British Columbia. I know I don't take the management side at all, but I'll tell you, there are a lot of people hurting out there, and I think it's time to get back to the bargaining table while the I.W.A. people are working. Not only are I.W.A. members hurting out there, their families are hurting. Those connected with the industry that can't work because of the strike are hurting. British Columbia is hurting. Everyone is hurting, and I think the only logical thing to do, they may not like the Hodgson report, they might not like a lot of things that have been suggested, but for gosh sake, get back to work and back to the bargaining.
But Mr. Kempf, they both agreed to their...
Just a minute. If they brought in the pensions at 55 with an 18% discount, the union would have had something on which to hang its hat. On the face of it, the union got nothing in the deal.
Well, Jack, I'm not the negotiator.
No, neither am I, but I couldn't help but say that. It's a miserable strike, it's a miserable situation, and it's going to be miserable for some time yet. I personally think that they're going to have to be ordered back to work on some compromise basis.
Well, that would be unfortunate if it does come to pass.
My thanks to Jack Kempf. Best of luck on the countervail. Well, you denied the fact that you'd blown the federal
Haven't blown it at all. Not.
Anyway, the best of luck on the countervail.
Thank you very much.
My thanks to Jack Kempf, Minister of Forests and Lands. Next, we're going to talk to the heat guy in the Hong Kong Bank of Canada after the break. Now you're going to meet a man whose face will become familiar in the years ahead, I'm sure. Gene Nesmith, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Hong Kong Bank of Canada. There are a couple of names that you've got to get straight in your mind. But let me put it this way to Mr. Nesmith. The Bank of British Columbia was heading into very serious trouble again and looked like it was facing liquidation one way or another. And they had to find a rescuer. And here is the rescuer. Is that putting it succinctly enough?
I'm not sure that that is totally the case, Jack, but indeed, we're the ones that have been involved in the purchase of the assets and the assumption of the deposits in the bank.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I, the taxpayer, gave you $200 million so you could take over the Bank of BC.
No, the taxpayer didn't give us $200 million. That $200 million came from the Canadian Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is money that is contributed by the people or the institutions that pay fees to that insurance corporation, which are the financial institutions in Canada. So it came from the banks and the trust companies that are part of the insurance corporation.
Had you previously been interested in buying the Bank of British Columbia, not buying the bank? What did you buy?
We bought the loans and we assumed the deposits. Yes, we had been, Jack, and it was a very superficial look. In September of 1985, we looked when there seemed to be a little bit of a skirmish in the marketplace, but we concluded at that time that the bank was doing fine and there was no place for us, so we let the matter drop.
So now, when you finally made the agreement, therefore, you received the $200 million. What did you give to the Bank of BC for its share of that?
We purchased assets in excess of the deposits in the amount of $63 million, $63,535,000. So that was paid in to the Bank of British Columbia.
That's right. Now, you're not concerned, nor can we discuss the position of the shareholders of the Bank of BC down the road.
No, we haven't had anything to do with that. Any discussions surrounding that will have to be discussed with the board of the Bank of British Columbia.
You have taken over the daily operation of the Bank of British Columbia and all of its branches and all of its deposits and, with one or two exceptions, its liabilities.
That's right, and all of its staff as well.
All the staff are now employed by the Hong Kong Bank of Canada.
That's correct, yes.
Right now. How long will the name Bank of British Columbia survive under your aegis?
Well, for at least 2 years, we have permission from the authorities to use the name Bank of British Columbia and all of the branches and so on for the next 2 years at least. So for the next 2 years, it'll be Bank of British Columbia division of the Hong Kong Bank of Canada.
Will you put your name up on the branches, or will you leave out the Bank of BC?
No, we'll leave the Bank of BC sign on all the branches.
And do you expect to gain much in the way of business by your acquisition of the Bank of BC?
Oh, yes, indeed. I think there's great goodwill attached to the name Bank of BC, and we hope that the growth that was established there before we became involved and before the troubles set in would continue, and we'd see a growth in deposits, a growth in loans, much as it was in the good days for the Bank of BC.
Now, what protection do I have for my deposits now in the Hong Kong Bank of Canada if I'm a Bank of BC who uses the Bank of BC and I am now under your aegis?
Well, you have the CDIC insurance, which covers depositors up to $60,000. And in addition to that, our group, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, guarantees all of the deposits, irrespective of amount, for the whole of the list of depositors in the bank.
Well, that's an additional guarantee.
That's correct.
I mean, if I have money in one of the big five in the Canadian banks, I would presume that if any one of them ever went belly up, that I would get 100 cents in the dollars, but nobody says that, do they?
That's right. That's right.
Whereas you're saying out loud that apart from the 60,000 guaranteed by CDIC, your parental assets would give me 100 cents back.
That's right.
On each and every dollar.
That's right. It's a big bank.
How big is it? What's the name of your parent company?
It's Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, which is a British bank centered in the colony of Hong Kong. And it has assets in excess of $100 billion Canadian, puts it among the largest international banks in the world.
And just to reinforce that, because it's unusual, if anything happened to the Canadian operation here, they would pick up the slack between the 60,000 and your total deposits.
That's correct.
Now, did I ask you about how many people are employed by the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank?
Well, around the world, there are some 46,000. In contrast, in Canada, the Hong Kong Bank of Canada has 140 people. And so we have assumed the responsibility for in excess of 1,400 people for the Bank of British Columbia. And as of Friday, they're all on our payroll.
So you've increased your staff tenfold.
That's correct.
Were you doing retail banking in the city of in British Columbia prior to this?
Yes, indeed. We had a branch on Main Street in Vancouver, and we have a branch at street level on Fort Street in Victoria.
Now, just by the way, what's going to happen to that magnificent building on Georgia Street, which was to be the headquarters of the Bank of British Columbia?
Well, I can't answer that. It was not part of the deal. That was not in the deal right from the outset. So that is, I believe, stays with the Bank of BC to do with whichever they choose to do.
So you didn't take over the building or the real estate subsidiary. You didn't take over certain liabilities.
That's correct.
But you took over how many billion in assets and liabilities?
About 2.6 billion of assets and deposits, about 2.5 and a bit.
Why did you do it, apart from the fact that, why did you do it?
Well, it goes back to the philosophy of our group, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Group. They operate around the world on the basis of gathering deposits from the countries in which they work to then lend out in the countries in which they work. So in Canada, they feel that they should acquire the deposits, gather the deposits in, and then lend those deposits in British Columbia and in the rest of Canada, unlike some of the other banks that come into the country where they go to the wholesale market for their deposits to fund loans. So that was really at the bottom of it.
But supposing I want to do business in the Pacific, or in the much vaunted Pacific Rim, do the connections of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank make it easier for me to borrow money in Hong Kong than if I tried to borrow money in Hong Kong from Vancouver?
Absolutely, yes. Those connections are very valuable to us. Even before the Bank of BC acquisition, the network of branches in the Asia-Pacific area that we could make available to our customers was a great advantage for us.
When was the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank founded?
1864.
Oh, it was a British trading house. I
That's
presume
right. That's
a
right.
merchant banker which
Yes.
became a banker.
Yes, that's right. Essentially correct.
So just to kind of wrap it up, just to make it quite clear, you have now taken over all of the assets and most of the liabilities, banking liabilities, of the Bank of British Columbia, all of their staff, the branches are all open and ready to go.
Yes.
And you will now spread your tentacles across the country and perhaps become a major Canadian bank.
That's right. We're almost major now, Jack.
Well, in your assets in this country, you wouldn't be major, would you?
Well, you'd rank number 3 among the Schedule B banks, and I believe it's number 9 or number 10 or number 11 in the total of the banks, yes. We're getting right up there.
Yeah, and what do you see for the future? I mean, when I sit here and talk about countervails and strikes and job security and Ontario prosperous and British Columbia apparently slipping, can you as a banker fill me full of confidence and glitz about what's going to happen?
I think you just have to be a witness to what goes on in elsewhere in the world to see that the stability of Canada, the way people respond to business here, notwithstanding all the problems, there's nothing but good potential here for a bank and any business, really.
My thanks to Mr. Gene Nesmith, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Hong Kong Bank of Canada. I'm going to have a free-for-all of my own after this now, and so you can throw anything at me you like to do after the break. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would have liked to ask you, gentlemen, what would happen to the depositors to the Hong Kong Bank? Hello?
Go on, he's still here, as a matter of fact.
What happened to the Hong Kong Bank, to the depositors to the Hong Kong Bank, if it should go belly up after the British colony is taken over by China?
Well, there's a good question always with respect to 1997. The assets and liabilities of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation are spread wholesomely around the world, and I believe, sir, that you could be confident that they have not placed or would not place all their eggs in one basket.
Why didn't I ask that question? It was the most obvious
question.
Well,
it's so obvious to me after hearing about so many banks here now. And one other question I would like to ask.
Go on. I welcome your question. Go on.
One other question I would like to ask is, how do they fit in to the Canadian Bankers Association?
Sir, we're a member of the Canadian Bankers Association. There's an international banking group which has a committee that is a part of the Canadian Bankers Association, and we're represented on the major committee of the CBA.
Okay.
One more question. Do you follow all aspects of the Consolidated Revenue Act?
I'm not sure that I understand your question.
Well, in the Financial Administration Act, you have the whole banking system of the federal government to the Bank of Canada. Do you come within the full perspective of it?
If it's an act that relates to all of the other banks, the answer is yes, unequivocally.
To the 8 or 9 principal federal banking systems.
Yes.
Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Thank you very much. Thank goodness I kept you, Mr. Nesmith. I don't know what went over me. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I hope you've still got him there. I want to ask what happened to the Hong Kong Bank the day it went broke and drove the one downtown here in Vancouver a little crazy.
I don't understand your question.
Oh, you're talking about the futures commodity business.
Well, I don't know. It was the Hong Kong Bank. It came over the news. It had shut down, and it affected the Hong Kong Bank in Chinatown here.
No, you've got the story mixed up, my dear.
Eh?
There was a matter which appeared in the courts over the question of some future and commodities trading, but it did not involve the bank.
Okay, can you answer this for me, too, sir?
I know I'm right on that, by the way.
How can you guarantee 60,000? You bankers all say you guarantee these things, but when the crunch comes, then all of a sudden nobody has to follow through with their guarantee.
No, ma'am, I'm sorry. The federal government, CDIC, guarantees the first 60,000 of any deposit, And Mr. Nesmith told us that his bank additionally guarantees 100 cents on the dollar for deposits.
That's correct.
Correct, right. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, I find this very interesting. I've been very interested in basically since the Bank Hong Kong was basically looking at the Bank of BC to take it over.
Right.
Number one being, if you're a businessman in this lovely little province that we have, when you have to go on your hands and knees into your local bank manager, and then he has to apply to Toronto in order to get a normal loan just to talk to him, and you're talking to Toronto constantly. Thank God for Mr. Van der Zam and other people that could look and see that we needed some other banking industry in this country other than those 5 major people that run this bloody country inside of that. You can't deal with them, you can't talk with them. That now that we can take a look at, there is other people interested to get into this monopoly.
Well, it certainly opens up the field a little bit, doesn't it? You obviously make your decisions in Vancouver.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Some mammoth decisions you might make in Hong Kong.
No, those decisions are made by our Canadian board, and Hong Kong, of course, has representation on that board. But those decisions are made either by management or our board of directors here in Canada.
There's been a lot of talk here about the international monetary centers. Does that have any practical aspect to it?
Yes, it does indeed, and I think this integration of the two banks, if that's what we call it, makes an additional service available in this international financial services concept that everyone's talking about.
Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yep.
Yeah, I echo the sentiments of the last caller there. I wondered, though, in the excess of assets over liabilities of $63 million, what part of that would be allocated for goodwill or the infrastructure that's already going? I assume, the bank might go down, but that's theoretical in some respects. But how much goodwill was in the $63 million?
Well, the only way I can answer that, sir, is by saying that on the balance sheet of the Bank of BC, there was no amount for goodwill. And we really just valued all of the assets that were there, along with the Bank of BC, and that's what we acquired, was the $2.6 billion. It was a little over $2.6 billion. And all of the assets, the branches, the leases, the improvements, and so on, as well as the loans, was in that figure.
That's just a physical count.
Yeah.
Nothing then allowed for what exists already.
That's
that is,
correct.
By way of goodwill, you took over 1,400 staff, you have all the branches open and running. That's not worth anything, obviously.
Well, I shouldn't say that, because we also, remember, we took on the responsibility of making all of the deposits good. So when there was really no other way to do it. We took it as a going concern, and that's why we say tomorrow morning, for example, it's business as usual in the Bank of BC.
But when you make all the deposits good, of course, you accepted $200 million from other institutions to guarantee that position.
No,
which really doesn't put you out on a limb very much, does it?
Well, yes, it does indeed. You don't know what is in that total of assets that might go into the ditch over the next 2 or 3 years, for which that $200 million was brought into the bank.
Well, good luck to you.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Sure glad I kept you. Go ahead from Kamloops.
Yes, to carry on a little more with what the previous caller said, let me get this straight. You got $200 billion from the Federally Deposit Insurance Company, which, by the way, if it goes bust, is guaranteed by the federal government. They come to, and you paid out $63 million. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
In other words, you've been given an asset worth $2.6 billion, a whole $2.6 billion asset with another $147 million.
That's essentially correct. There are two things you must remember. In that $2.6 billion of assets, there's every likelihood that a good part of it will become non-performing, as we say down the road, and that $200 million is to assist in compensating for that. Also, there is the risk always, I suppose, that individuals, companies will withdraw their deposits from the bank, and the Hong Kong Bank of Canada must make good those deposits against those loans. So there's a major portion of risk being assumed on the ongoing of the bank.
That sounds like corporate welfare. Jack, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Was Van City offered $200 million to take over that bank?
I can't answer that question. I wasn't a party to that transaction.
Oh,
at
but
all.
I had just asked Jack
Oh,
Webster.
sorry.
I don't know.
Boy, oh boy, let's talk about corporate welfare. Thank you very much, Jack.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Webster. I'm a depositor with the Bank of BC, and I've been with them since 1970. I have echoed some concerns of what the other three gentlemen previously have just said to me. I'm not clear on where our bank was insofar as poor performances, but I don't think the bank would have lent me the money to purchase one of my competitors out on such a deal. But I don't want to delve in. I think the other gentleman made it more clear in their questioning than I did. But what is going to happen now with the Bank of BC? Are the management loan decisions going to stay here in Canada if I want to expand my business?
Okay,
and I need
just
$2
got
million?
time to answer it.
The answer is yes, unequivocally. Those decisions are made here, and they're made in Vancouver in the main.
Well, I'm certainly glad I kept you for the questions, because the questions were in many ways better than my questions. I think the point to be remembered is, though, that this operation was essential to prevent a collapse of confidence by the Bank of BC going into involuntary liquidation.
That's correct. That's correct.
My thanks to Gene Nesmith, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Hong Kong Bank of Canada. After the break. Sex education, would you believe, tomorrow night, with all the new STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. We're going to look at the problem. 5 p.m. precisely.